Ahoy hoy, I'm Planetwalk, and I had this video idea on Ken Wheeler and why people actually believe what he says. And part of it was going to be how he doesn't present any actual evidence. And whilst I was taking a glance at his channel, I saw a video titled The Aether and Proofs of Aether, which seems to debunk the idea that he doesn't ever provide any evidence. It says it in the title, Proofs of Aether, so clearly he's going to provide evidence in this video, right? Well, if his previous videos are anything to go by, it's going to be more word salad and autonomous field modalities, which is also word salad, so just word salad, I guess. So make sure your counter space is clear and get ready for another Ken Wheeler video.
There. I like to make original videos of which there's not another example of on YouTube, and this is certainly one of those. I'd like to be talking about a few proofs on the ether, the important ones anyway. I've got a list of nearly 40.
You know, if Ken did actually have 40 proofs of the ether, shouldn't he be able to get that all published in a scientific peer-reviewed journal and then change science as we know it?
First, you need to make a bold and yet 100% undeniable statement, and I've said this many, many times before.
Oh, this is going to be interesting. Am I going to agree with him, or am I going to have to deny his 100% undeniable statement? Let's see.
That throughout all of human history, there's never been postulated any ultimate foundation. Before you build a house, you lay a foundation, concrete and all that stuff. Never been postulated any fundamental foundation for cosmic mechanics other than two things, ever.
I'm sure there have been many mechanics postulated in the past. However, when the evidence shows that something is wrong, the thing that is wrong gets discarded.
One has been the ether, and the other one has been atomism. I call it jokingly the cult of bumping particle. It believes that everything is a particle interaction.
Yeah, immediately a couple of other things come to mind that have been postulated, such as the simulation hypothesis and string theory.
And if there's no evidence, and this is not hyperbole, if there's no evidence for these particles, and you could look this up too, by the way, they make up particles, and they call them virtual photons. They also too call them virtual particles. You can look that up.
So he says that there's no evidence for virtual particles, but there is evidence for virtual particles in a sense. So virtual particles are used to explain certain effects that we see on matter in supposedly empty space. If the space was truly empty, then we'd expect to see one thing, but with virtual particles, we would expect to see another thing. For example, there has been measured polarization of light back in 2016 coming from around neutron stars. And the polarization of light is exactly what you'd expect if virtual particles existed. And there's also the Casimir effect, where two plates in a vacuum were seemingly pushed together by an unknown force, which is best explained by virtual particles. So, it's not like there's no evidence for virtual particles. But for the ether, however, it seems like there's no evidence for that, although apparently Ken has some. So I wonder what it is.
Current day quantum says, so what's going on in a magnet is the emission of virtual photons. Now that's never been the input or output of any experiment ever done.
But it does seem to be one of the best explanations for what's happening with magnets.
Please believe me and take a look for yourself on the internet.
No wonder there's so many flat earthers that listen to this guy, because he sounds like a flat earther. Believe me, do your own research on YouTube.
Getting on to proofs of the ether, I'd like to point out some of the really important ones. Just a few. I think I'm going to hit on like 5 or 6 out of the list of 40 that I have. If people want another list of the additional 35 plus proofs of the ether, let me know and I'll make a video. But I don't like to, drone on unnecessarily.
Is that so? I'm going to let my audience decide on that one. Leave a comment letting me know if you think that he drones on unnecessarily.
Specifically, let's get to fields. Okay. Maxwellian field equations only define a field with a vector period of time with a given result, such as joules, watts, volts, and seconds. If you ask any scientist, and trust me, you could take this up with any particle physicist or any, I have a PhD in physics, theoretical physics. Just ask them. Say, excuse me, sir, what is a field? they will actually guffaw, and they'll say something on the accord that something you could read directly out of Wikipedia, which was written by some of these people. Well, a field are lines of force.
Well, good thing I know a scientist. Let's ask him what a field is. Ahoy hoy, AB Science. So, what is a field?
Ooh, that's a tricky one. I think the best definition of a field is a large open area covered in grass and populated by sheep. In New Zealand, you might know that as a brothel. So, in physics, a field is just a quantity that is represented by a tensor for all points in space. So if you think of it in terms of, say, temperature, which is a scalar or a rank 0 tensor, then you have all points in space which have some value for temperature, and we would call that temperature field. Now, we also then have, say, the electromagnetic field, which is a vector quantity, and it has a value for all points in space. Field is just an abstract concept that we use to describe things.
So, Ken Wheeler said that you'd say something along the lines of lines of force. That's what a field is. Well, what he said that you'd say force is. Field is, sorry.
Yeah, no, because lines of force are not a thing. They don't exist. Lines of force. Sorry?
I was just going to say, okay.
Yeah, lines of force don't exist because, well, they don't. They are a useful visualization tool and useful for drawing diagrams or teaching non-specialists about how the force throughout a space kind of how it all sits together. But really, there's no such thing as a line of force. And actually, one of Ken's heroes, Oliver Heaviside, presented a formulation of Maxwell's equations, which describes everything in terms of vector calculus, and that helps us visualize the electromagnetic field in terms of a vector field rather than the lines of force that people like Faraday used.
Okay.
So it is worth pointing out that a field doesn't necessarily mean a force. For example, temperature is a field, but temperature is not a force. We can think of potential that is a field as well. And there is a force associated with it, yes, but potential itself is not a force.
That makes sense. So, like, for example, the amount of energy that something had could be represented as a field, and just because something has energy, that doesn't mean that it's a force or anything, right?
Precisely, because a force means that there is a gradient in energy through space.
Okay.
They love to say that, and they'll also say waves.
So I literally asked a scientist, and he didn't say either of those things. Maybe next time ask a scientist before you say what a scientist will say?
Anyway, these people, and I mean this emphatically, it's not my opinion or my feeling or my belief, these people cannot, in any way, shape, or form, tell you what a field is. It's just not a difficult question. You know, the famous, and everybody should watch that video on YouTube, it's called Feynman Explains Magnetism. It's like a 6-minute video, there's 1,000 copies of it online, like 1,000. And, you know, he sits there and squirms. Well, what is magnetism? He sits there and squirms. I mean, this is the genius that these people think is, you know, the god of quantum mechanics and quantum physics.
Well, in that video, he does give an answer, but he explains why the answer is going to be rather simple before he gives the answer. Although he probably spends a little bit too much time explaining why the answer is going to be simple.
These people don't know, and it's okay not to know. But they can't tell you what a field is. And since everything is fields, and fields are not particles, no way to know how, absolutely not, it's not my opinion, that's a fact, is another fundamental, key, foundational proof of the ether. period.
Wait, is this first proof of the ether that scientists can't explain what a field is, yet I asked a scientist and he explained what a field is? Welcome to Proving That I Am God. You know, if you were to go ask Ken Wheeler what my favourite band is and why, he would not be able to give you a concise answer. He would dip and dodge around the question, and you know, that just proves that I am God, so everyone should worship me.
By the way, Michelson-Morley experiment did not disprove the ether. I've made videos on this. There's an enormous amount of evidence actually out there.
Yeah, I feel like that video is going to be very similar to this video.
Light. Everything in quantum, by their own admission, is based upon their understanding of light. They'll tell you it's, as Einstein called it, das Lichtwand. He says, and as a particle explains light, nor do waves, but together they do. They call it a wave-particle duality, and of course there are no dualities in nature.
Well, how do you explain the fact that light sometimes acts like a particle and sometimes acts like a wave? Just saying that there are no dualities in nature doesn't debunk that fact. It'd be like me saying that there are no Ken Wheelers in nature. Doesn't make Ken Wheeler disappear, unfortunately.
But light is not an emission. We all grew up, including me, thinking when you turned on a light switch, this light bulb is emitting photons. It's emitting electromagnetic waves. We were all taught that, and that's completely ludicrous. Light is not an emission. And I will quote you now, Nikola Tesla, who specifically said, light can be nothing other than a sound wave in the ether.
So just because Tesla may have believed in the ether, that does not mean that the ether exists. Newton believed in alchemy. That does not make alchemy real. It's really weird how people go, this person is very smart. They've discovered things. Yes, so that means that everything this person says must be true, even if smarter people come along and disprove it.
Now, a sound wave is not an emission either. You know, we have speed of sound. And we all suffer this fundamental delusion that something has a speed and it's moving from here to here. Well, that speed is not a speed. It is the hysteresis of the medium, specifically the rate of induction.
Induction, huh?
Induction.
I still love that song, but getting back to what we're actually talking about. So, stating that a light wave is no different than a sound wave, and thus needs a medium to travel through, that medium being the ether, I don't consider that to be a proof for the ether. That would be like me saying that gods are no different than humans, but there needs to be one god, that god being me, so therefore I am a god and you should all worship me. That doesn't really work because, let's say you believe in gods and humans, probably very different things. And for Ken's argument, you need to accept that light needs to travel through a medium like the ether, much like sound needs to travel through a medium to propagate.
So what Nikola Tesla meant when he said light can be nothing other than a sound wave in the ether. Well, Nikola Tesla was right. Einstein was wrong.
So just because Nikola Tesla says a thing doesn't mean that it's right. I could say that Einstein said a thing, and he's right and Nikola Tesla is wrong. That's not really an argument. You need to explain why he's right over Einstein.
True scientists like Tesla, James Clerk Maxwell, Oliver Heaviside, Charles Proteus Steinmetz, these were true experts in field theory, not Einstein. He was not. Einstein was a plagiarist. Everything he stole actually came from several people, but primarily from Henri Poincaré.
So from what I can tell here, there's a couple of possibilities. There's the possibility that Einstein did plagiarize stuff, but then there's also the possibility that he came up with some of these things of his own accord separately. For example, let's say that I come up with an opening that has never been done before in chess. Let's call it the Planet Walk Gambit. And then you come up with the same opening, even though you've never heard of me, never interacted with me, and you call that opening the Ken Wheeler Gambit. Now, just because we've come up with the exact same thing, does that mean that one of us stole it from the other? No, of course not. We could have come up with it independently.
Well, the photon idea is an abstraction from misunderstanding the coaxial nature of light, which is a refraction and compression along the dielectric. Yes, and that, of course, is just a compound ether perturbation modality, because that's all a field is, and I define that in my definitions, which, by the way, is a free download in the descriptions below.
There are so many problems with that. Using that logic, he could go, oh, so you think a field exists, right? And I could go, yeah, fields exist. And he goes, well, the field is just the ether, so therefore the ether exists. That's kind of begging the question, don't you think? It'd be like me saying, you believe that I exist, right? And everyone else goes, yeah. And so I go, well, I exist, I am a god that exists, so therefore you should all be worshipping me. The second is that he doesn't seem to understand what a field actually is, because in his definitions thing, he says that there is only one ultimate true field, and that is the ether. Except, as we clarified earlier, you can have a temperature field, you can have a gravitational field, you can have heaps of different fields. And one of the really funny things is that in his definition stuff that he said about, he actually cites this very mysterious Ken W. I wonder who that is. It's a mystery. It can't be that he actually cited himself.
Light, you cannot explain lightly when light passes through glass. And of course, it's not passing, nothing is moving. It's the rate of induction or the perturbation of the medium. It changes its rate of propagation. And propagation, once again, like using the word speed, implies something is moving from here to here. Well, it's not. It's the actual medium. The medium is stalled. The hysteresis and rate of induction changes. Whereas the current science will say light slows down through glass. I mean, the type of glass, same with water, other things. They can never explain light speeding back up after it leaves said medium such as glass or water without breaking the law of conservation of energy.
So this is something that is actually very complicated. A lot of people will say that it's light getting absorbed by atoms, and then it's getting re-emitted by atoms, and getting absorbed and re-emitted takes some time, which slows it down. Other people might say that light bounces off an atom and bounces from atom to atom, and therefore it takes a longer path, which makes it appear to slow down. Now, the most compelling answer to me is actually a very complicated answer, so I'm probably going to butcher the explanation slightly, so do forgive me. Now, as a wave of light travels through a medium, it interacts with the electrons, and the electrons start oscillating. Now, as the electrons are oscillating, it creates another wave in the electromagnetic field. Now, these two waves, the wave of light and the electromagnetic field wave that has been created by the oscillating electron, are traveling at different speeds. Now, when you add two waves that are traveling at different speeds together, you get a third wave which is traveling at a different speed to both of those waves. And that third wave is the wave that light travels in when it passes through a medium. As I said, it's very complicated stuff, and I don't fully understand it myself. I try and make an effort to understand it, but I try and make an effort to understand it, rather than just denying it.
But light is a fundamental ether proof. The very definition and what fields are is an ether proof.
So I don't consider light an ether proof because I don't necessarily think that light needs a medium to travel through. And I don't think that defining fields as ether proves the ether either. It'd be like defining myself as God to prove that I'm God.
Now here's another one that's a lot more complicated and it would require an entire video. For more, you need to look up Poincare disk model of projective geometry. What is being projected?
So I found the Poincare disk model of hyperbolic geometry. Is that the same thing? If it is, then it's just maths. And maths without the context of reality does not prove anything in reality. It'd be like me saying, well, you know what you get if you try and get the square root of a negative number? You get imaginary numbers, and that proves that everything in my imagination is real. And you know what's in my imagination? The fact that I am God. But who knows, maybe I'm jumping the gun on this. Maybe he will provide some context of reality.
Even these people in quantum and particle physics, and the key word there is particle. And by the way, quantum refers to a quantity. They don't believe in anything that cannot be quantized. There's no such thing, and by the way, this is really, really, really important, and no one ever talks about this. Quantum does not refer to anything in Mother Nature.
Now, I'm not sure what he means by quantum does not refer to anything in Mother Nature, but the reality is that quantum mechanics does. You know, you got the double slit experiment, you got wave-particle duality. Yeah, all these things refer to stuff in nature.
There's no such thing as quantum. It's not electrical. It's not magnetic, it's not dielectric, it's not gravitational. It is these people's inability to fundamentally understand nature. They've come up with this neat little word called quantum, and it refers to quantity. The smallest unit of quantification.
So it hasn't been born out of some inability to understand nature. It's been born out of a way to try and understand nature better. And it's actually been very successful, because without quantum mechanics, computers don't exist.
And like a hammer, everything is a nail. If you're a mathematician, everything has to be counted. You can't understand or even fathom anything if you're a mathematician if you can't quantize it. Well, if I can't count it, I don't care about it.
Ken, you do know that science is all about measuring things. All about counting things. That's science. Of course they're going to count things. Like, does Ken think that science is just people speaking to each other, having conversations about what they think the universe is? No! Measurements are involved. Counting things is involved. That's the whole idea of science. If you can't measure it, it's not science.
Anyway, the Poincaré disk model of projective geometry is rather complex to explain, but everything has volume due to magnetism only, as I've actually said many times. So Poincaré disk model of projective geometry. And the one thing that the New Age movement got right is that the entire universe is holographic.
Oh boy, we're going off the deep end into the pseudoscience today, aren't we? With things that obviously won't be measured or counted.
Well, I mean, how is it? And by the way, you can see if you've ever had your hands on a supercell or a ferrocell, you're talking about nanoscale levels of thickness, and yet you see incredible, voluminous, holographic geometry that looks like you're looking at something with 5 inches of depth, and yet it's less than a tenth of a drop of liquid smashed between two optically flat pieces of glass. The holography on it's incredible.
Hey, Ken, just because there are holograms that exist within reality does not mean that the entirety of reality is a hologram. The fallacy of composition isn't just a fallacy that someone made up because they don't like Ken Wheeler. The fallacy of composition is an actual fallacy that Ken Wheeler just employed.
The Poincaré disk model of projective geometry, and you should look that up, and there's many, many examples. There's a lot of math associated with it, which, make most people's eyes cross.
So yeah, I'm pretty sure he's talking about the Poincaré disk model of hyperbolic geometry. So he got the name of the thing that he's referring to wrong. And again, it's a mathematical model. And you need context to apply it to reality.
But fundamentally understanding that the voluminous nature of the universe, because the voluminous nature of the universe is only extant because of magnetism only, because the after effect of a divergent magnetic field, i.e. the loss in energy or inertia, the dielectric, manifests as magnetism, just as ice is a modality of water. Under a temperature condition, the actual, and of course ice expands too when it gets cold.
So there was a lot of word salad there. I see that Ken has been using his counter space very well to prepare us some salad. But it sounded like what it meant was that the universe is big because it's cold. I'm not sure if Ken is aware of this. He should be if he watched the thing that he referenced from Feynman earlier. But not every solid expands as it gets colder. In fact, it's very much the opposite. Most solids will actually expand with heat. Although, I do have to mention something that seems to have escaped Ken Wheeler's attention. And that is, the universe is not ice.
The loss of energy or inertia in the dielectric manifests as magnetism, and that volume, if you will, the air of the balloon, this projective geometry of manifestation that gives volume to the entire universe.
Okay, it seems like he's connecting the disk model to reality in some way by saying that it gives volume to the universe. Care to elaborate?
Not even a single scientist on this earth has ever said, well, that volume is like, and this is really important. There's not a single, and this is the easy way to get these atomists, because most of them have never heard of the Poincaré disk model of projective geometry, but it's absolute undeniable reality as to the entire nature of the universe.
So there are two possible reasons for this. The first being that you actually mean the Poincaré disk model of projected geometry, in which case I can't find anything about it. All that comes up is the Poincare disk model of hyperbolic geometry. The second, of course, is that it just might not be useful to them. Just because something exists in mathematics doesn't mean that it's useful to scientists.
And as I've said 1,000 times with the toroidal geometry that is magnetism, the volume, the after effect, which is space, and space has no properties, as Nikola Tesla said. The after effect, or the volume, or the air, because one thing the scientists did get right is that, well, every atom is 99.9999999% empty space. Actually not. It's an electrostatic dynamo, and the volume in there is the after effect of magnetic effect, which is this projective geometry.
So he said that the scientists got the fact that atoms are 99.999999% empty space right, but then he said it's actually not? So did they get it right or did they get it wrong? Which one is it? Now there is an interesting discussion to be had of whether the electric repulsion of an atom constitutes empty space or not, but that is more of a philosophical discussion rather than a scientific one. And the same goes for whether we should just consider the electron as a particle when considering empty space, or the entire electron cloud.
That is magnetism, the after effect of a toroidal field. I mean, if you have magnetism as a toroidal field, which of course is what it is.
If that is what it is, then why is it that when I search it up, every result that I get is about generating a magnetic field with a toroid? Oh, I forget, he just makes this up.
The centrifugal divergent vector of the loss of energy or inertia, the dielectric, that we call, as human beings, call magnetism. What is the volume of that torus? Yeah? We all know a torus has volume, right? A donut. Well, what is the volume in there?
So I'm going to pretend like what he said makes sense, and it still doesn't make sense because, at what age do you stop being young? The reason why I asked that question is because a magnetic field doesn't really have a volume, right? It sort of just goes out and gets weaker.
What is maintaining that volume? Well, it's the ether, because that loss of energy or inertia manifests as volume.
So I hate to be the person that points out all the logical fallacies that someone uses, but sometimes an argument is just so full of nothing that all that's left is a logical fallacy. In this case, it's a non sequitur. He says that because the loss of energy and inertia manifests as volume, therefore ether. Like, how is that even an argument?
This is what energy, and this is one of the fundamental secrets of the universe, and the conjugate geometry of the universe, regarding the magnetic and the dielectric, which are respectively the torus and the hyperboloid, is that loss of energy or inertia necessitates a different type of infinity. The infinity of counter space of pure potential, and the empty infinity, which is what space is. Space has no properties, it is empty. The after effect as manifest. And we have ultimate reality of counter space, and we have false reality of this holographic projection. Anyway.
So I listened to something like that, and I do want to understand what he's saying. But it very much sounds like there's nothing there to understand. It sounds like word salad to me. So believe it or not, it is possible to say absolutely nothing whilst using big words or even a lot of words. Does anyone remember writing essays in school and you had to have over a certain number of words and you'd just repeat what you had said, adding nothing new to the conversation? Yeah, well, take that, and rather than repeating yourself to add nothing new to the conversation, say something completely different to add nothing new to the conversation.
I think some have postulated they've tried to, support their own position. So it was virtual photons, and that's, of course, is what they say is happening outside of a magnet, is the emission of virtual photons, which has never been the input or output of any experiment ever done. It's purely conceptual with no basis in reality. It is arbitrary and is ludicrous. It would be no different than if I tried to explain some unknown phenomena with unicorns and leprechauns. I mean, if people believed me, then they would, of course, be crazy.
Oh, thank you very much, Ken. Thank you for giving me that clippable material. I'm certainly going to use it.
I mean, if people believed me, then they would, of course, be crazy.
You can say that again.
This one is even harder to try to explain than Poincare disk model of projective geometry, and that's harmonic incommensurability.
Harmonic what? Incommensurability, right? incommensurability meaning to have no common measure, and harmonic being a wave with a frequency that is a multiple of the original frequency. You know, that sounds like a complete oxymoron. Emphasis on the moron part of that word.
Harmonic incommensurability could never, ever, and of course we have the logos of spirit and matter, and of course scientists don't think that, there is a soul. There's no soul in the body. It's like, I'm in complete agreement with you, but that's not a denial of the soul. There's no signal inside this radio, and there's no real fire inside this iMac display.
You know, if you want to use the soul as evidence of anything, you first have to show that the soul exists.
Harmonic incommensurability can never, ever, ever be explained through some sort of atomistic model.
Well, at the moment, it sounds like harmonic incommensurability cannot be explained by anyone because nobody knows what the fuck it means.
It's okay for a scientist to not know. I would actually have a great deal of respect for them. Say, there's just some fundamental stuff we don't know.
And that is exactly what scientists do. If a scientist doesn't know something, they'll just say, we don't know. Have you ever heard scientists talk about dark matter? They admit that they don't know what dark matter is. They say they have some ideas of what it could be, but they say, we just don't know what it is.
And also, too, no one has ever gone looking for the answers to things that they already think they know the answer of. And these scientists are they're not real scientists, are extremely hubristic. This is what's going on, it's just too complicated for you to understand. It's the exchange of quantum virtual photons. It's like, what? I mean, a 10-year-old child, understands that this is ludicrousness.
Yeah, but I'm not going to go to a 10-year-old child and ask them how to build logic gates in a computer, am I?
Anyway, harmonic incommensurability can never, ever, you couldn't even begin to explain it with atoms or particle interaction. It's completely impossible. And along that line, explaining life, the consubstantiality of matter and spirit, is again completely impossible to explain vis-a-vis atomism.
Well, I don't believe in the spirit, so I don't really have to explain that. But I can explain life with atoms because, amino acids are the building blocks of life. And they're made out of atoms.
You can never explain, for example, someone feeling happy or sad based upon, say, for example, an arbitrary vision of something completely unreal. Say a child is all of a sudden happy and has empirical outward evidences after having temporarily dreamed about, a lollipop sky castle where there's just unlimited free candy. Something that has no basis in reality. It's completely unreal, yet has a positive effect.
So all that can be explained by things that happen in the brain. Dreams are a process that happen in the brain. Happiness is a process that happens in the brain. If we didn't understand happiness, there wouldn't be things like antidepressants that exist. SSRIs, for example, prevent the reuptake of serotonin, and the reuptake of serotonin causes your brain to produce less serotonin, leading to worse moods. We understand all this.
And by the way, the most important things throughout all of human history, they, like hope, faith, love, hate, desire, these have moved and built the entire world that we live upon. These things cannot be quantized. They're not particle-based.
So some of those are feelings, and some of those are just constructs. Feelings can be explained by processes in the brain, and constructs are just things that we've made up.
It's impossible to say that. I say, well, electrical signals in the brain. It's like, okay, let's talk about dielectric or electrostatic signals in the brain and throughout human tissue. It's like, well, you've never explained that because you've never defined a field. You can't define a field.
Wait. It sounds like his argument this whole time for the existence of the ether is that scientists can't define a field. That's pretty much all it is. If you just say that, scientists can define what a field was. I asked one earlier. He explained what a field was. Then that's his argument debunked. Just because Ken Wheeler uses big words and puts words that don't necessarily belong together, that doesn't mean that he's right. It doesn't mean that he's smart. It just means that he's worked out how to make people believe him. And big words, they're not a replacement for evidence. Ken Wheeler, this whole video, has provided zero evidence. Nada. He didn't cite any studies, he didn't cite any experiments, he didn't cite any tests. He said that counting wasn't science, which means that measurements, the thing that everyone uses, can't be science if counting isn't part of science, which I suppose there might be something that he doesn't want to measure. All he has is his own unverified made-up ideas. Now, I haven't finished his video, but I'm not going to, because we're 2/3 of the way in. He hasn't presented any evidence so far. I don't think that he's going to present any evidence in the last third of his video. But before we wrap up, Ken, do you have anything that you want to say to my audience?
I mean, if people believed me, then they would, of course, be crazy.
So I hope that everyone has understood where I've been getting at this entire video. There's been a very clear message throughout the video, and that is that I am God. I've proved it, me damn it. But anyway, leave a like and subscribe if you like this video, and don't forget to ring the bell notification so that you actually get notified of when I post new videos. As always, a big thank you to my $20 or more patrons who have been very kindly worshipping me with their money. What Jesus, Hugh Jarsz, M.C.Nutkin, Jane Spade, Wolfie, Morrie, Graymore Ghost, KidVicious, and Sacha Campbell. If you want to support me financially, you can do so over on Patreon. Please do, this video was very hard to make. But anyway, I will see you in the next video. Between you and me, thank you for watching.